questions?
Just a clarification, you said that REITs doesn't exist in India, doesn't exist in China, only in Hong Kong. So this is also a special regime for Hong Kong as compared to mainland?
Because there is no regulation established in China for REITs investment by at the Chinese stock markets. Shanghai and Shenzhen have no regulation for securitization in real estate. But you can invest in China's assets if you are a fund listed in Hong Kong and in Singapore. And now in India, they have decided to establish a regulation. So now it should be possible to create REIT entities in India. And China, seeing that India has decided to establish this regulation, has also moved, is also trying to move toward that, but I'm not so sure about their project.
This will be a SEBI initiative. It will come through under, which we have started already. And I think they are structured in place. I'm just curious about, let me know. Yeah, please.
I have a small clarification which I need. Those people who are deprived because of these facilities, what steps have they taken to provide services to them? Like the fourth point. I'm just asking about the fourth point which you have said in the conclusion, that when it was the double deprivation for the citizens, what extra steps which states have taken to provide services for them? Or they were just deprived?
Did they receive anything in counterpart, you mean?
Yeah, in counterpart outside this facility?
Yes, in counterpart what they receive is the youngest households who live in the vicinity of the social housing estate are quite satisfied because they have received nice shopping malls. So these households are satisfied. But the households who are living in the social housing estate all complain that they have to go to remote wet markets or they have to face higher costs. So they all complain that the shopping malls are not compatible with their needs. Because even if they are nice, I didn't have time to elaborate, but for example, the elderly in the Lok-Fu Plaza, they have on purpose avoided to put bench in the facility because they don't want elderly to stand there, to stay there, to make it dirty, like this idea that elderly will make things not fashionable if they stay there. So the idea is just to avoid elderly actually. So this is what they do. The elderly, they are not at ease in this fashionable new shopping facility. They don't feel that it's their it's dedicated for them. So you can say that Hong Kong citizens, maybe the youngest and the household who can afford shopping in these shopping malls have gained something. You made a point in that respect. But since the retail facility were designed for the local resident, in that case, it's a loss. It's a deprivation.
What is the aim to make this shopping mall fashionable? Is it just to increase the rate, or is there any strategy behind this? Just for the image of the group, or?
Oh yes, yes. It's an interesting question. It's true that the link tries to have a kind of social, the idea of an improvement of the built environment is also included in their strategy, but if you look at the way they operate, it's purely increasing the returns. It's purely attract institutional investors from abroad, seeing look like how much you can make, you can take from the link REITs and make profit from them, from that. But of course, they try to have this. They have this discourse that they improve. For example, they give this educational training to the shopkeeper. For example, not only not to spit and things like that, but what they explain is that they will, because many of these shopkeepers are really very much like those who live in the social housing estates. So they have no educational background, so they don't even know properly how to the accounting method. They are not very skilled in that. So they help them improve, enhance their knowledge. So they show in their report, they say we have improved the knowledge of the shopkeepers. They do this kind of thing. They also say that we have improved the built environment. We have, and they operate. They improve the built environment. This is something that we cannot deny, but the detrimental effects are so great, and especially on the elderly. And there has been a lot of movement against the link. There are even people watching. There is a kind of link watching. There is a network. I don't remember. Maybe it's called link watching. A network that is constantly looking at what's going on in the link. So, for example, if the link knows that they watch them, so they will be very careful in managing the property or enhancing values. They will do it smoothly, so as not to hurt this watching network. So interestingly, the old people or the residents are not that much involved in this network. They are rather young people who try to keep, who would like to keep the social structure of Hong Kong. They know that Hong Kong has a lot of jobless people because most of the manufacturing activities have been transferred, has been shifted to the Guangdong area. So there are many people who have been have been retired, who have retired earlier, and are jobless and are very poor. They have a very low allowance. So these young people very much care for the elderly, because most of them are their parents or their grandparents.
Query. For example, whenever they get their value enhancement through link,
yes,
do they share part of this value enhancement with the elderly citizens? Profit sharing mechanism?
You mean in terms? You mean in financial terms?
In financial terms, because when they are increasing the rent in order to have their own profitability, and these are the institutional investors who have invested in Link.
They could share if they offered shares to the local resident. But as I said, first the local resident couldn't afford to buy shares. Those who bought shares in the beginning of the period were middle-range households, rich households of Hong Kong, who could afford to buy the shares. But then as I said, they decided to close this channel and rather offer the opportunity to purchase the share to the institutional investor only. So now it's pure institutional investor. Small investor cannot access these instruments. So I don't see any other mechanism that would allow the residents to take profit, to share the profit, because if they cannot invest in that REIT entity, then I don't know how they could take benefit from that. And even the middle class cannot take profit from it. Even people from other housing estates of Hong Kong.
How are they putting that in under the category of social housing then? How are they putting it under the category of social housing then? Because society at large is not getting that much benefit, at least the one who need it. Because when we are saying that it becomes a pool of social housing pool.
Yes.
So in social housing, when you have helped elderly by putting up this, placing this facility, the higher earning also shall go to them.
Excuse me, I don't understand what you're saying.
Can you still call it social housing if they're using this these facilities for?
Yes. Yes, it's an interesting question. Yes, definitely, because you have social housing units which are offered at extremely low rents, extremely low. And this is not going to change. So far, I haven't been told that it's going to change. I don't think that they will privatize that part, because they will have so much, it would be impossible to live in Hong Kong for most of the population in that case. People would have to shift to Guangdong, or even Guangdong is too expensive now. So they have to keep these properties, these public properties, the same conditions, but they consider that retail is different. Retail can be separated from the housing function, and this is why not? I mean, but the problem is what this. It was written in the Code 4 of the Housing Act. It was written that the retail should be part of the welfare. So it violates this article. But they consider they could trespass this and just take it. So it's just kind, within the housing estates you have all these housing units, and in the core of the housing estate you have this shopping mall. And only the shopping mall has been privatized. So it's isolated private entity inside the housing estate. But still, people enjoy, for example, supermarkets. They enjoy supermarket. So in a way, it also brings some new services. But as I said, most of the elderly complain. Only the young people who can afford to have increasing daily necessities are still satisfied with the fact that the environment has changed and it's more beautiful than before. Because you see these small shops were not really fashionable, so young people would prefer the new facilities. Yes?
So, my question mostly arises out of lack of knowledge. What is the difference between real estate firms listed on the stock markets and these REITs? I have very little knowledge of the subject, so hence this question.
Yes, so what would you like to know?
What is the difference between real estate firms or companies listed on the stock markets and these REITs? Like we have real estate developers. Okay. What is the difference between them and these REITs?
Okay. I would say that, especially in this case of Block Fu Plaza, it gives a good idea of what what do the financial market dictate to real estate in the case of REITs. You have, as I said, there is a convergence between finance and real estate in the case of REITs. And you have, when you manage a REITs fund, you have constantly to pay attention to the vacancy. You have to have always full occupation of your buildings, because you have to give to the investor regular dividends and regular returns from their investment. So in that case, you have constantly to increase the cash flows, to make sure that cash flows is is not reducing, or is increasing, at least not reducing. You have to secure cash flow, because investor will expect you to give them regular dividends from their investments. So this is what you can expect when you invest in the stock market. Even if you invest in any kind of company in the stock market, you will expect to receive either dividends or an increase in the share of the capital that you have invested after several years. But in the case of REITs, it's mandatory to distribute dividends to the investors. While in the case of, for example, private equity, the second kind, they have longer. After 6 years, they must give you back the money, so they have lesser constraints. They can even fail. This is what they did after the great financial crisis. Many of their projects failed because the local market could not accept new developments. In that case, they don't have the same pressure. The pressure is less because they have a larger time span to do to operate their business. In the case of regular companies, for example, in Hong Kong, you have all the groups are listed on the stock market. It's not mandatory to distribute dividends. It's not mandatory for the regular companies to distribute dividends. So they can invest in new projects. There is no such a constraint to keep cash flows at the same level or increase constantly cash flows. They can do land development for a few years without having cash flows back from it. So it's totally different. In the case of REITs, you have really very strong regulation protecting the investors and constraining the REIT fund to provide regular cash flow, regular dividends. So I don't know if I have replied to your question. If it was your question.
In that case, what are the advantages of these REITs?
Yes.
You know, if a company, as you said in Hong Kong, they are reluctant to part with their investment, and what are the advantages for these big firms, big companies to move to REITs? Are there?
For these big companies, it's when they have lots of buildings, it can be interesting to sell some of the buildings to get just some cash from their investment after 30 years. So they just make cash and then can use this capital to invest in new products. So this is one. The other, usually what they do, for example, in Japan, they have, or in Singapore, they have within the company they have different entities, and the REIT is there to purchase buildings that other subsidiary produce. So it's just a way to sell their assets to produce. So it gives, it gives work to the subsidiary which produces some of the asset, and then they also control the management company of the REIT. So they can decide if they will buy this asset or not to their subsidiary or to another group. Usually they are supposed not to have a conflict of interest, but actually they have. In Asia in particular, they have, or in all groups they have that. But so it's and also it gives there is for the investor there is another incentive is to have tax exemptions, because the REIT entity is exempted from tax if it would distribute more than 80% of its of the cash flow to the investors. So this is what they usually do to allow the investor enjoy the tax rebates. So this is interesting, but for the investor, not for the company. Not very much interesting for the company. For the companies, use it as a platform just to get back money from to sell their buildings and keep them within the group, inside the group, and continue to manage them through a management company. But these assets are not their own assets any longer because it belongs to the REIT. But since they can keep control through the management company, they are satisfied with that. So it's a way to to manage the different maturity of the buildings. In fact, yeah, we can say that.
I want to know if I'd like to know, based on the experience of any of the bigger players, like the United States, UK, France, Singapore, etc., of REITs being agents of gentrification in any way, in that they own a certain number of properties and decide, well, we can make even more rent, or we can add value if we sort of break 6 of them and rebuild them as something else, and trying to do that. Or is there some kind of rent control legislation built into REIT management or REIT legislations in any of these countries?
So you have several questions. First question is
whether these REIT entities ever display the kind of gentrification leading sort of practices.
Yeah, practices as this.
Yeah, this was sort of, because it is social housing, they're limited on how much they can do,
yes.
And only the retail is really available for quote-unquote malpractice, whatever. But in other countries, in other contexts, have they been more expansive in the way they've broken and rebuilt?
It really depends very much on the regulation of real estate securitization in each jurisdiction. There are lots of different regulations. In Asia, usually they are not allowed to make land development, real estate development, which is the best way for gentrification, the best way to create value. So this is why the REITs is the link is interesting, because with that they didn't create value through development. They only create value because they got very low prices for the facilities, and they could take advantage of that. But usually, for gentrification, you really have to make land development, and in Asia it's very difficult. So, but you will find that in France, the SIC are allowed to make land development. But usually I would say that the REITs are not that much gentrification force, because usually they seek only one building. They make, they compose portfolio of several buildings, but they are not nearby. They are totally different from one another. So if the gentrification would have an impact if you have a big project which changes the built environment in a large part of the city. So since they just operate at the base of a parcel of a building, I don't think they have such a... But for example, in Tokyo, yes, in Tokyo it's different, because they have developed housing REITs, which is very rare housing REITs, because housing is not, the returns are not high. There is lots of high vacancy, and it's not very interesting for REITs. But they have managed to do that. Interestingly, they only develop buildings of about 4 to 8 stories, and for only small units for young people. And in that respect, they have considerably, they have contributed to change the the supply of housing, but I wouldn't say that it's really gentrification because there are only, residents which are distributed in a very chaotic manner. So there is no real impact on the vicinity of these buildings. You see what I mean? But on average, there is a big impact in terms of housing supply, because they have managed to give a housing supply that did not exist before, which is housing supply of reasonable rents, small units by institutional investors, which did not exist previously. So I think that the case of REIT, the link, is quite it's quite exceptional, because it's a portfolio of lots of retail facility which are all at the core of social housing estates. So the political and social issues are very tense, but yeah. So it should not be the case in many other places. And in France, for example, we don't see such experiences. No, not yet.
Stupid question, I think, because I don't understand anything to this financial setup. But my question is to the fact of the local political economy you were mentioning. So at two levels, if some countries have regulation on have allowed these REITs and others have not, what is the reason behind it, and what would a country why would a country allow it, for instance? What do they think the REIT can do, for instance, to the cities? If India decides tomorrow or China decides tomorrow to allow this form of financial investment in real estate happen, it means that behind it there is a political design or the idea that it might increase built environment. Or so what is it? Just to have an idea. And second, since you talk about looking at the local political embeddedness, what is the link locally between these REIT investors and the political class, let's say, of Hong Kong? Is there any linkages? Do they benefit from it? How do they benefit from it? Because we know that in China or in Asia's capture of urban rent has been a strong phenomena, and in India it's most probably what is driving right now a lot of the changes in cities. So introduction of that kind of instruments would maybe link to, and since it's locally embedded, would lead maybe or would raise some issues related to who's capturing this rent, etc. So if you can just give us a broad idea on these two, on the two scales and the linkages with politics.
Thank you very much. This is really a political economy question, and it's very interesting. First of all, why would be a merit to introduce a REIT regulation in any country? The merit is just to draw capital to the built environment without having, for the local authority or whatever, having to supply these funds, just to facilitate capital supply in real estate. And so it's not only a question of money, but also for any country, it also shows that you are securitization friendly, that you are finance friendly, that you will enlarge a base of your financial industry, of course, because you will have people. This will also help your real estate industry, which is actually always a very strong industry in each country, especially in the biggest areas. So everybody welcomes this kind of new instrument. Because it's fresh money, especially, for example, in many countries like in Hong Kong, in Japan, and other, it has been introduced when the local real estate market were frozen because banking credit was frozen. So it has been also a way to defroze the market. It can be used for that too. So it has many merits actually, and And it's not so destabilizing because it's a long-term investment. It seeks reasonable returns. It's not like a high risk, high return. It's core investment. So from the viewpoint of even a politician, you can argue that it's a rather sound kind of investment. Actually, it's a sound kind of investment. The only drawback is that it will be easily hit by any systemic crisis. For example, GFC had hit with its compartment in the stock market because there is, in the stock market, once one part of the stock market is hit, then it will disseminate to all the compartments. And then REITs will also, regardless of the performance of the local market, real estate market, they will just be hit because it's within the same real estate market, the same stock markets. But usually they will return to very quickly to their former balance and go up. So it can be easily argued that this kind of new investment channel is sound and interesting and can be welcome for citizens and welcome by citizens and by the real estate professionals. So the second, it's for the Hong Kong REITs. I haven't have time to explore this political side of the REITs, but it seems to me that I'm not very sure about it, but it seems that the regulators in Hong Kong wanted to introduce a new, so they wanted to privatize some of the social estate. So they had introduced this link, and using that platform, they have also shown that they were able to enlarge the financial basis of the financial sector of Hong Kong. So they show that they are securitization friendly, that they have also, of course, created new services related to the REITs. But who actually took benefit from this? I would say that institutional investors, Hong Kong institutional investors took, and I saw, but I'm not sure about. I saw that charity funds, which are also included in institutional investors, charity funds in Hong Kong may have taken much of the profit. And I've been told that, for example, if a company in China wants to be listed in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, they have to give money to the local charity fund. This is mandatory. So, and I saw the charity fund as one of the beneficiaries of the REIT. So I think that, I don't know who is behind the charity funds. This thing I can't tell you, but I would say that local institutional investors, including charity funds, are the main beneficiaries of this of the profits made by the link.
So these local financial investors would be industries and wealthy households, very wealthy.
Industries would be mostly banks, insurance companies, pension funds. Yeah, the pension fund of Hong Kong. Thank you. Pension fund of Hong Kong. Yes, pension funds, mostly. No corporate, no big corporate, no manufacturing corporate. I don't think so. Mostly finance-related operators, and probably foreign institutional investors. drawn by HTBC to see to show off. Please come to Hong Kong, see what we can offer to you. This kind of thing.
You got a follow-up question, or can we just close it?
Yeah, well, I was interested in asking you if there's any connections that can be made between housing bubbles and rent bubbles and REITs in any way, because you're now bringing connecting the stock market value and the property market value, which are usually not connected. When one goes down, the other usually actually comes up. But now that they are connected, is it conceivable that when the stock market collapses, that might also lead to a knock-on effect in property values?
Yes, yes. Thank you for this question. Yes, there are two levels. As I said before, since REITs is part of the stock markets, it is always hit by any systemic crisis. For example, I know better the case of Japan, but in Japan there have been lots of merger after the GFC and regardless of the conditions in Japan. So this is one thing. So bubbles in one country can hit REITs through the stock markets in others. But usually they get back to their balance because they are sound investment, basically sound investment. It can happen, and it was the case in Japan, it can happen that if the financial crisis gives rise to a wider crisis, like a crisis of production, economic crisis at large, then of course the demand for real estate will also decrease, and it will be bad for the REITs. But if it's not the case, then they will get back to their former position quite quickly. Now there is another way to see that. For example, in Tokyo, the REITs have been introduced in early 2000, and because, as I said, the credit was frozen, so they were very active, trying to purchase land and trying to purchase buildings in the center of Tokyo. And what happened is that they were in competition, trying to purchase these buildings, because they are very risk averse, They don't go out of the 5 central wards of Tokyo when they purchase office building. They go even in the three wards. And there are 23 wards in Tokyo. They only go to the 3 central wards. Not even Shinjuku and Shibuya are dangerous for them. So they go there, and they are in competition because then there is not so much supply of buildings. In that case, the price, they can generate, not a bubble, but they can generate an increase in price. But what happens is, once the level has increased, then they have to stop buying. Because, as you said, if they purchase at a too high price, then their return will be low, and it will not be attractive for investors. So this is what happened exactly in Tokyo. They call it a mini bubble. It was generated by the competition between REITs because they were in a very narrow built environment in competition, and now it's a competition for healthcare REITs in Tokyo. I just observed that a few months ago. It's fascinating. Now the prices are increasing in healthcare because they are in competition. So, but at one point it stops. So it cannot go to a big bubble, because this is only a question of returns. Investors seek returns and not profit without risk. So they go, they auto-regulate. So it's a rather sound kind of investment. Even if I gave you a very bad picture of REITs in the case of Link, I think it's interesting because it's very, the impact is so great that it's very interesting to document that. But in fact, my personal opinion, having seen many different REITs markets, my personal opinion is that REITs is not such a bad investment instrument. as it's not so does not generate so much gentrification, and does not create bubble because it regulates itself.
In India, if you read papers on REITs, there is always this narrative that REITs would be a vehicle for retail investors to invest in the real estate market. So it's always put out as that. So this is a good opportunity right now. If a retail investor wants to get into the market, the barrier is too high. So if there are REITs, it would come down. So this is the narrative that somebody like me don't officially track the sector, but just reads the paper. This is what we see. So is there this narrative in Hong Kong or Japan that at least the link REITs, you seems to say that all investors are either institutional investors or people with larger investors. So is this narrative there across the REITs that you've studied?
Usually the most rewarding REITs are office and retail. This is in any market you will find these two kind of REITs, because in any built environment you will find office buildings, and in any big city you will find that, and it's because the returns in the retail sector are quite good. Yeah.
Retail, I said retail, small investors, household investors.
Sorry,
yeah.
I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Can you? So, yeah, I see what you mean. So, so you said, can you? So is it?
It's really an opportunity for small investor or not? Because in the case of Hong Kong, you seem to say that it was blocked.
Because in India, this is the narrative that you see. Small investors who currently can't invest in the real estate market because you have to have lots of money to do that. Mm-hmm. So if there are REITs, you can buy shares in the.
Yes, this is usually the main argument in favor of REITs when they establish a regulation. They say, this is also for small investors, it's good for everyone, and so on. Actually, it really depends on the market. I mean, it depends on the strategy of each REIT entity to open up to small investor or not. In France, it's rather open to small investors. I think you can invest in any kind of SIC in France. Whereas in Hong Kong, as I said, and I would say that in Hong Kong, most of even the other REITs are they target rather well-off people, because the returns are not bad. It's about 5%, which is much better than any kind of saving account, saving vehicles in Hong Kong. So it's not bad. So they will give that to their, their good clients, their good customers, the families which are very close to the group, and so on. So maybe because there is not so much REIT to sell, this is also because they will keep that for the nearest customer. But as for when there is a large REIT market, it's much more open to retail investors, such as, for example, in Japan. But in Japan, there are mostly regional banks. Regional banks are the most important investor in REITs, in Japanese REITs. But any retail investor can invest. There is no particular impediments to. I think Hong Kong is very much an exception in this respect. Yes, I think so. Because the market is very narrow.
So, lots of questions, but I'll take them later. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll sort of put this, because it's been a fascinating, as Nikhil says, we're talking about REITs quite a lot in India. And first, the distinction between the fact that these are largely based on rental flows and not on real estate development as such, the profits from that. I think that distinction was very important. And then obviously, as you said, the nature of how they can change neighborhoods because of their investments, as you mentioned in the Link case, again also becomes quite important. So and the detail with which some of these kinds of things happen and the way it actually puts together is quite fascinating. You mentioned the charity issue, and of course Hong Kong's Jockey Club is one of the biggest charity places
this is well known, yes.
in that area. So, and I'm sure they have shares of the Link story. So there might be some indirect benefits to these elderly people through the charity space that will come back to them. But that is a very long-winded route through which you can actually get those benefits. But thank you so much, and I hope you don't mind if we upload the video on the website.
You mean the forward?
No,
the video here, yes. Sure.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So in Germany, what is